Well, hello and welcome to our discussion of civil rights. So, yeah, I forgot to put it up on the screen. So, let me do that. We talked about civil liberties. So, the other side of the coin is civil rights. Civil liberties and civil rights are like two sides of the same coin, basically. They're both equally important, but there is a little bit of difference between the two. If you don't remember from before, basically, civil liberties are outside a government's purview altogether, whereas civil liberties are outside the government's purview altogether, like the right, like free speech or freedom of religion, whereas civil rights are centered more around equality before the law and thus do involve government response and government action. So, like the right to vote is a civil right, freedom of speech is a civil liberty. All right, so we need to talk about a little bit of history and talk about how civil rights are, what the courts say about civil rights and how they are applied today. So, like I said, civil rights are a set of rights that are centered around the concept of equal treatment and equal treatment by the law and before the government, and the government here is obliged to protect them. Most important civil right is probably the right to vote. Um, we have, and obviously, if you know U.S. history, you know that we have had not our record on civil rights has not always been great. Two concepts I want to talk about here are, well, one concept is discrimination, but there are two different subsets of it I want to discuss. One is public discrimination, which is discrimination by state, national, or local governments, and private discrimination, which is discrimination by private individuals or businesses. Public discrimination legally is easier to deal with because it's a pretty simple concept, right? Everybody pays taxes, it's everybody's government. So generally, the government should not discriminate. Private discrimination, you run into some more complicating factors here. You may run into a situation where rights conflict with each other. Like, what if someone doesn't want to serve a certain group of people? Well, do they have the right to do that? What's the right of that individual versus the right of people to fully take part in our society? So the courts here, it gets more complicated. It's simple, pretty fairly simple when it comes to public discrimination, because again, government shouldn't discriminate. End of story. Private discrimination, though, you run into individual rights versus societal rights. And so you may have situations here where rights conflict. So somebody has to win out, somebody has to lose out. So it gets more complicated here. All right, so role of government in ensuring equality was not originally written into the Constitution. We have, though, added a number of constitutional amendments since then to try to address this. First of all, the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, the 14th Amendment, which established that equal protection of the law and due process rights should apply to states as well as the federal government, and the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. Also, later on, the 24th Amendment, which outlawed poll taxes. By the 1950s and by the 1960s, legal discrimination against African Americans, women, and ethnic minorities had ended. However, obviously, discrimination against all these groups does continue in private form, I guess you could say. Let's talk about this. What does equality mean? Well, equality of opportunity would be what we would achieve if every citizen has an equal chance to succeed in life. So at birth, someone born in Beverly Hills and someone born in Harriman, Tennessee, where I'm from, so I can say that, would have equal chance at succeeding in life. If we were to achieve equality of opportunity, logically, equality of outcome should follow. This would be what would happen if the results were comparable for all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or national background. So, in other words, if we looked at the CEOs, the Fortune 500 companies, they would look like a sample of American society at large. You'd have roughly equally divided between men and women. You'd have what? Think about 14% Hispanic, 13% African American, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know off the top of my head what it looks like, but I'm guessing it does not look like that. Congress certainly doesn't. I think it's fair to say. So we still have a ways to go. I think it's fair to say in terms of equality here. All right. So I'm going to stop right here. This is sort of our intro here. Next, I want to talk about some history here, like legal restrictions on civil rights. So we will come back here in mere moments. See you soon.